The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents a debate review of Matt Dillahunty and Sal Cordova on Pascal's wager. Yeah, you heard that right. And if you haven't watched the debate on Pascal's wager, it's up here as well. I could not believe when I was asked to do this that I was actually being asked to do a debate on Pascal's wager. And I really thought it was going to be, quick and easy. It turned into a 3+ hour debate that actually had very little to do with Pascal's wager, which is disappointing, and one of the things that I'll get to here today. I did 2 debates in the period of a month, so you're going to see both those debates and both of the debate reviews. I've already recorded the debate review on the debate with Stewart and Cliff Connectley on biblical slavery, and so it was a weird month because is biblical slavery moral? And hey, let's debate Pascal's wager. So first of all, for anyone who's not familiar, what is the wager? Well, Blaise Pascal was a mathematician who essentially argued a cost-benefit analysis of belief in a God. And it's a flawed one. But essentially, if I accept Christianity and believe Christianity and I turn out to be wrong, I've lost nothing. But if I fail to believe and am wrong, I've lost everything. And everything in this case would be defined as the preferable afterlife. There are many, many problems with that. I'm not going to rehash all the problems with Pascal's wager because literally the first video that I added as an instructive element on this Atheist Debates project 5 or 6 years ago was a 30-minute or so deconstruction of Pascal's wager that went through all aspects of it, goes into great detail, talks about Pascal's life, what he meant, what the argument is, what it isn't. It's the most edited video I've ever done. I've got graphics and stuff. It's not just me sitting here. As a matter of fact, when it was over, people said, hey, that's really cool that you did all that work, but we'd rather you just sit down and talk with us. And that's what decided the format of this channel. An attempt to do a deep dive into Pascal's wager resulted in you getting videos of just me sitting in front of the camera talking because that's what people preferred. And if this is the best way to teach, then I'm in favor of it. So I will say that on this debate of Pascal's wager, I went into it trying to figure out what could possibly be defended, because Pascal argued that you couldn't prove God, that it was a tenet of faith, and that there wouldn't be any evidence-based thing that you could point to warrant belief. And so belief had to be kind of tricked. The whole purpose of the wager is to decide that you need to act like you believe until and with the hopes that you actually do convince yourself to believe through, I don't know, intentional self-deception or pretending for so long that it becomes real. There was no defense in this debate, by the way. I have no serious issue with Sal himself, other than he presented no defense to Pascal's wager, despite the fact that he accepted a debate on Pascal's wager. And that's the case that I'm going to be making today. It's irritating to continually have apologists agree to a topic and then just ignore the topic in order to preach whatever they want. Despite having been done with Pascal's wager for years and even declaring moratorium on any presentation of it on the show for a while, I studied, I prepared, and I addressed the topic, which is what I do every single time I'm booked for a debate. If I showed up at a debate on a topic only to sit there and say, well, Christianity is a fairy tale for grown-ups, and atheism is the only way to a better world, and as a sciencey person, Joe Blow over here says it's really irrational to believe this, I should be disqualified and lose because I'm not addressing the topic. And yet this is what Sal does. This is what many of the debate opponents that I've engaged with do on a regular basis. It is becoming more and more common for debate opponents to just ignore the topic of the debate. Stewart and Cliff largely ignored the topic of the debate in the biblical slavery debate because they just went to other verses like love thy neighbor and, be kind and we're all equal in God's sight, none of which have anything to do with slavery. In the debate here about Pascal's wager, Sal did something similarly distracting. I don't look at debates as win-lose. So when I say I should be disqualified and lose, I'm talking about something extraordinary. And I think this should apply to debate opponents as well. from the theist side. Sal didn't seem to know much about Pascal's wager. He didn't seem to know much about Pascal's intent or history, even though he cited an event in Pascal's life. All of these were important to understanding the wager. He spent the bulk of his opening talking about creationism and citing other people on creationism and not addressing the topic at all. Even if this had been a debate about creationism versus evolution, he didn't present argument or evidence, he just kept citing people. Now, Sal's nice, and that's a problem. Because if you have someone who's nice, who's not addressing the topic, who's not making rational sense, who's not being cogent at many points, and you point them out, you're going to look like a bully. You're going to look like the guy who's picking up. Look, this poor guy showed up. He knows in his heart what Jesus wanted and meant, and he's just trying to convince people, and he's a really nice guy. Well, you look like a bully when you're pointing out the mistakes that this individual is making. But this is a debate. And if you don't bring your A game, that's your fault. You should not have agreed to a debate. And I'm going to encourage apologists to stop agreeing to debates about which they have no interest in actually addressing the topic. But it's hard to get people to acknowledge the gaps in their understanding. For example, without replaying it and showing all of it, let's go through some of the things in Sal's opening. He started with a slideshow that had Pascal's wager, how should we then live, was the second slide. And it's a book that he was referencing. But that book isn't titled Pascal's wager, how should we then live? It's just titled, how should we then live? Now, first of all, this is another example of a problem with a wager. It's not about what's true. It's about what you actually believe or about what you act as if you believe. And so there's a real problem with Pascal's wager in the sense that it's not an argument for the existence of God. It's an argument for belief. And it's not an argument based on evidence. It is a fallacious appeal that we should believe because the consequences of not believing are worse. And that's just really bizarre. But the book that he was referencing, which he literally said, Pascal's wager, how should we then live, is not titled that. It's just titled, How Should We Then Live? And it's by Francis Schaeffer. The title doesn't mention Pascal's wager. In fact, if you go to the Wikipedia article for that book, Francis Schaeffer, How Should We Then Live, and you do a search on the Wikipedia page, you will not find the name Pascal or wager, unless somebody goes and edits Wikipedia after this. But as of the one that I looked at, you won't find the word Pascal anywhere on that Wikipedia page, and you won't find the word wager anywhere on that Wikipedia page. This book has nothing to do with Pascal's wager, as far as I can tell. Schaeffer's a presuppositionalist, so he's not going to be making evidence-based arguments, so he's already in conflict with Sal there. And I'd recommend that you look into the book and its critics because it's not relevant to the topic and is just a bunch of complaints about how the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and Darwin and modern scientific thinking have helped destroy Christianity, and the book wants to bring it back. Maybe an important book, has nothing to do with Pascal's wager. Sal thinks that what the book is about is what Pascal's wager is about, because he's already stepped away from the wager and viewed this as metaphorical, like how should we live our lives? Well, that's kind of true in the sense that Pascal's wager addresses how you should think with regard to one issue, but it doesn't tell you how you should live your life. And you have to take an extra step to go, but if Pascal's wager convinces me that I should believe in God, even if I don't have good reason to believe in God, then the demonstration of my belief in God is by living the way that God wants me. Except that we don't know how a God wants you to live, which is why there's countless denominations. But in any case, how we live in a broad sense and that book have nothing to do with Pascal's wager. Then he goes on to talk about Pascal's niece and her supposed healing and how that would have been evidence for God. The problem is, Pascal acknowledged there can be no evidence for God. So the healing of his niece by this is in conflict with his notion that since we cannot demonstrate the existence of God, we should just believe anyway. Now, it could have added to potentially strengthen it, but that's not Pascal's wager at all. He then cites astronaut Charles Duke, who was an alcoholic with a bad marriage, and he became a Christian, and then he led a prayer meeting where a blind girl attended and was healed. Now, Sal doesn't say this is proof of God, but he also seems to believe that it happened. He seems to be willing to accept the story that this astronaut who became a Christian had a prayer meeting and a blind girl showed up and was healed. Where's the evidence for that? Do we have medical records of her being blind before the meeting and being not blind afterwards? Was she someone who's totally blind, which is how we often think about blind, whereas there's also legally blind or vision impaired and other things like that? Did this story happen at all? We have no way of knowing, but he cites the story as if it's relevant to Pascal's wager when it's not. He also mentions that he called into the Atheist experience and talked to Tracy, and that he asked Tracy some questions about Charles Duke and this healing. And he said that, if he had witnessed a miracle like that, he would follow God forever. And Tracy pointed out that she wouldn't. And I didn't go back to watch the clip, but having an understanding of Tracy and what she was likely to say, Tracy was pointing out that you haven't made a connection that there was necessarily a God or that this occurred. And so it's a report of a miracle. And even if I saw it myself, that doesn't mean I know how or why it occurred. How do I know that it's from God? If there is a God who's doing a miracle as evidence for his existence, and it truly is proper evidence for his existence, then that God should just show up and say, here's a miracle that I did. It is proof of my existence. Because now you would have the actual entity who you think's existence is obvious and proved by the evidence agreeing with you and showing up. There can be no reason for God not to. If a miracle occurs and it was done by God and it's so obvious that we should all just accept it was done by God, then there's no longer for any reason for God to continue hiding. He can just show up and say so. Now, the rest of his openings were just quotes against evolution. Richard Smalley quote, evolution has just been dealt its death blow, and Sal claims this relates to Pascal's wager. It doesn't. He cites Ben Carson, who is an idiot who thinks that the pyramids were for grain storage. Ben Carson isn't relevant to Pascal's wager, isn't relevant to much of anything at all. He's an unstable non-genius. He cites a bunch of creationists from his alma mater. None are relevant to this discussion. As a matter of fact, nothing about creationism is relevant to this discussion. When he cites those creations, he just waves it off as, here's another data point. Those aren't data points. You don't get to say so-and-so believes that creationism is true, and that's a data point, and certainly not a data point on Pascal's wager, an argument that does not need and cannot be supported by data points. The whole point is there isn't data for the proposition, so you should believe. The only data you could present is why it's better to believe than not believe. He didn't do that. He even claims that God determines quantum properties when measured, proposing a solution to quantum indeterminacy, which has nothing to do with the wager. Virtually nothing in his opening did, and he didn't even understand it. He even reverses the wager at one point and suggests that all of this evidence for God means it would be bad to accept the wager against God. But that's not what the wager holds. This isn't just if you don't believe, you've lost everything. He's saying, here's all the evidence that suggests why you believe, except that nothing he's presented is evidence for God. Or certainly not the specific God that Pascal was working towards. He also tries to argue that the earth is young, which isn't relevant to the wager. And he said, even if there's a 0.5% chance that this is true, you should believe, but there's no demonstration that A, there's a 0.5% chance of this is true, or any percent chance that it's true, and it misunderstands the wager by presenting evidence. And if there was only a 0.5% chance that something was true, that's not a good bet. This is Sal doing bad math, which Sal did bad math a number of times during the debate. But to say, hey, if there's even a 0.5% chance that it's true, you should believe it. Well, I'm going to sell 200 raffle tickets at $100 each. And that's your cost for one raffle ticket. So if you bought one, that would be 0.5%. And your chances of winning are now 1 in 200. And as long as my payout is less than 1 in 200, it is a bad bet by definition. But the payout is infinite. No, it's not. Infinity isn't a quantity. This is the mistake that keeps getting made. The wager is saying God can't be proved, and in the absence of that, you should believe It's not saying, hey, maybe we should do some math and figure out whether or not this is reasonable. So for debate opponents and debate organizers, do better. When a debate topic comes up, I ask, can we define this better? Can this be, is biblical slavery moral? For Pascal's wager, I didn't know how to redefine it. Is Pascal's wager a good bet, a wise bet? I mean, that's what I think we were trying to get to. But by not defining it, I guess I left it open to where Sal could just talk about whatever the hell he wanted, which evidently was about creationism, except that he barely touched on that in like 12 minutes. It was an opening devoid of any substance actually related to the debate. If you want to be a debate opponent, please, number one, stop accepting debates where you are not willing to defend the proposition in question. If you want to take a debate in order to have a debate, you can still agree to a proposition you're willing to defend. Two, stop just quoting people. Use your own damn brain, because the quotes that some of you pick are awful and not on topic. Sal was constantly referencing quotes from people, and they weren't relevant. And then he quotes Pascal, and he doesn't seem to understand it, because the quote from Pascal is, at least learn your inability to believe. Pascal is acknowledging that people cannot choose their beliefs. He cut that part out and begins with the line after it. It says, but at least learn your inability to believe. Since reason brings you to this, reason convinces you that you don't have a good reason to believe, and you cannot believe. Endeavor then to convince yourself. Pascal is advocating for intentional self-deception. Fake it till you make it. Act like you believe in the hopes that eventually you do. None of this is about whether or not there's good evidence for God. None of this is about whether or not there's good reason to even believe in God. It is, here's a threat. In order to avoid that threat, you should try to convince yourself to believe. So Pascal's wager is still dead. It's as dead as it was 100 years ago, 500 years ago. It's as dead as it was, it's as dead as it was when I did that first video. My video on this channel stands without a single point to correct or change because of this debate. And I was hoping that I'd hear something new. I was hoping that I would need to submit some sort of correction or clarification, but I didn't. So be aware, there is no guarantee in a debate that your opponent will actually stay on topic or even address the topic at all. I would love to have truly impartial moderators who, after opening statements, would say something like, I'm sorry, but one of our participants has utterly failed to address the topic of this debate, and I won't waste anyone else's time with this fiasco. My apologies to the audience and to the interlocutor who did address the topic, and then end the debate there. That's what should happen. Because right now, there are a number of YouTube apologists who want to debate me. No matter the topic, they want to debate me. They're not seeking understanding. They're not interested in a specific topic. They just see how effective I've been over the past 2 decades, and they want to take me down a peg. And so if that means that they have to pretend to debate Pascal's wager while talking about creationism, that's what they're going to do. And if that means they have to pretend to defend biblical slavery while denying any such thing exists, that's what they're going to do. This notion that I am some target is the exact opposite of how I view debates. I genuinely don't care who the person I'm debating is until there's been a demonstration that this person is dishonest, grossly immoral, etc., to where I don't want to share a stage with them, other than to take down their ideas. I prepare for the subject, not the person. There's far too many apologists they didn't prepare for me. They just wanted me. If they'd have prepared for me, this would have been a little bit more difficult. If they'd have prepared for the subject and me, this could have been really difficult if, in fact, there were any substance behind any of their claims. They want to take down me. So bring it on. But eventually, all of these individuals who are targeting me rather than the issues, we're going to run through them. And then maybe we'll get to the point where we're debating serious interlocutors about serious issues, which I've done. Some of my debate opponents have been phenomenal thinkers. We just disagree on something, and sometimes we've identified where that delineation is. But for all those individuals who are like, oh, we got to take down Dillahunty, I need to debate Dillahunty. Cool, good, do it, I'm here. But while you're targeting me, I'm going to be targeting the issue, and you're going to lose every one of those debates over and over and over again. Because pride goeth before a fall, and if they keep targeting me instead of the subject at hand, they will just keep falling and failing. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.